Dawn breaks over the western shore of the Gulf of Suez on December the 27th, 1969. The desert is quiet, the kind of quiet that feels temporary, like it's holding its breath. A small Egyptian military convoy moves along a dirt track toward a radar station that isn't supposed to surprise anyone. It's been there. It was there last night. It was there every night before that. The lead jeep slows down. Then it stops. The sergeant squints into the rising sun, rubbing his eyes, annoyed at himself for feeling tired. Maybe it's the glare. Maybe it's the desert playing tricks. Where the radar station should be, there is nothing. No metal structure. No rotating antennas. No control trucks. No diesel generators humming away like they always do. Just empty sand. He steps out of the vehicle, walks forward. Faster now. The silence is wrong. There are no smoking craters, no twisted wreckage, no signs of an airstrike, no bodies, no scorch marks. Nothing exploded here. Nothing burned. The ground looks cleaned. Boot prints are pressed into the sand, sharp and deliberate. Thick tire tracks cut deep lines where heavy vehicles were dragged. Cables lie severed with surgical neatness, ends darkened by heat, as if someone had calmly taken a torch and said, "This will do." The sergeant feels his stomach tighten. 7 tons of Soviet radar equipment do not simply vanish overnight. Bases don't get lost. They get destroyed. They get bombed. They leave evidence. This leaves questions. He reaches for the field phone with hands that suddenly feel too large for the receiver. "What do you say, the radar is gone?" Sounds ridiculous. "The radar was stolen" sounds insane. His superiors in Cairo will demand answers. Cairo will demand answers from the Soviet advisors. And the Soviets do not enjoy riddles. Somewhere, an officer will ask the obvious question, the one no one wants to hear out loud. How do you lose a military installation without hearing a single explosion? The answer, inconveniently, is not on the ground. It's in the air, or rather, it was. At that very moment, nearly 100 kilometers away, 2 Israeli CH-53 helicopters are fighting gravity over open water engines, screaming well beyond what the manuals politely recommend. Beneath their bellies, swaying like an accusation, hangs something that should never have been airborne at all. Israel didn't destroy the radar. They took it. Carefully. Quietly. Piece by piece. It is without exaggeration one of the most audacious thefts in military history. No gunfire for glory, no explosions for effect. Just bolts, cut in the dark rotors beating the night sky, and a simple, dangerous idea carried to its illogical conclusion. For now, the Egyptian sergeant stands alone in the desert, staring at the absence where certainty used to be. He does not yet know that by the time the sun fully rises, an entire balance of power has already shifted. All he knows is this: something very heavy has disappeared, and whatever took it did not leave footprints going home. To understand why someone would even consider stealing a radar instead of destroying it, you have to rewind a few years back to the dust and smoke left behind by 1967. The Six-Day War ended quickly, decisively, and in Israel's favor. Too decisively, some would say. Because what followed was not peace, but something slower, dirtier, and far more exhausting. It was called the War of Attrition, and it lived up to its name. Along the Suez Canal, day after day, night after night, artillery-fired positions shifted by meters, and nothing really moved except the casualty numbers. On the ground, it was stalemate. In the air at first, it was not. Israel's Air Force still owned the sky, and it owned it for one simple reason: it refused to fly where radar expected it to be. Israeli pilots flew low, not a bit under the radar low. They flew scraping dunes, following riverbeds, skimming the desert floor so closely that the ground itself masked them. Western radar systems struggled with this. They filtered out ground clutter. Hills, sand, heat distortion, all that noise was ignored. Israeli jets slipped through that blind zone, struck and vanished before anyone could react. It wasn't elegant. It was effective. Then, in late 1969, something changed. Pilots began reporting the impossible. They were flying low perfectly within the old safe envelope when their radar warning receivers suddenly screamed. They were being tracked. Painted. Seconds later, anti-aircraft fire or guided missiles followed with uncomfortable precision. Aircraft started going down. Not in spectacular dogfights, just intercepted, caught, removed from the sky. Morale dropped fast. This wasn't a failure of courage or training. The pilots were doing everything right. The problem was that the rules had changed without warning. The change had a name, P-12. Unlike most Western radar systems, which relied on higher frequency microwave bands, the P-12 operated in very high frequency ranges. Long wavelengths, old-school physics. And those long waves behaved differently. They bent. They diffracted. They cared far less about ground clutter. A jet hugging the desert floor was no longer invisible. It was a bright, obedient return on a Soviet engineer's screen. The irony is hard to miss. The technology wasn't new in spirit. It was clever in how it ignored assumptions everyone else had agreed to live with. While Western designers focused on precision and resolution, the Soviets built something blunt, wide-eyed, and stubborn. It didn't see beautifully. It saw reliably. And reliability in war is often enough. For Israel, this was a crisis. The Air Force was not just another branch of the military. It was the backbone of deterrence, the difference between pressure and survival. Losing aircraft meant losing pilots, and losing pilots meant losing time. Time a small country never has in abundance. Intelligence assessments made it painfully clear. This wasn't a temporary setback. Destroying one radar wouldn't solve the problem. The Soviets could replace hardware. They could ship another unit. Another after that. As long as Israel didn't understand how the system worked, it would remain reactive, always one step behind. This was not about bravery versus fear. It was about doctrine. One side had discovered a way to see the battlefield differently. The other had not yet learned how to blind that vision. And that is where the uncomfortable thought began to form. You don't defeat a sensor by guessing. You defeat it by opening it up, tracing its logic, learning how it thinks. To do that, you don't need explosions. You need access. By the end of 1969, the Israeli skies were no longer safe by default. The desert had eyes now, and those eyes belonged to Moscow. The question was no longer whether the radar had to be dealt with. The question was how far you were willing to go to truly understand it. The place where the war quietly turns is not a battlefield. It is a windowless room. No medals on the walls, no applause, just rows of desks, dim light, and people whose eyes have learned to distrust what looks normal. The Israeli Image Analysis Unit lives in this darkness. Hours pass marked only by the click of slide projectors and the scratch of pencils. These men and women do not hunt tanks or soldiers. They hunt mistakes. Small ones. Human ones. The kind that appear when someone believes they are unseen. On one December night, a young analyst leans closer to a grainy aerial photograph taken over the western shore of the Gulf of Suez, near Ras Gharib. At first glance, it is nothing. Sand, wind-shaped emptiness, the sort of place pilots fly over without bothering to blink. Then something feels wrong. Two tents sit alone in the desert. Bedouin tents, supposedly. Nomads move. That part makes sense. But these tents are too precise, too clean in their geometry. Desert life is rarely that neat. The analyst adjusts the magnifier. The shadows don't behave like fabric should. They rise too evenly, too mechanically. And there are tracks, deep tracks, not the light marks of jeeps, but the heavy impressions of trucks that carry real weight. They arrive at the tents and stop. No tracks leaving, as if the vehicle simply dissolved. That never happens. Then comes the detail that seals it. A thin line carved into the sand, barely visible unless you are looking for it. A trench, recently dug, connecting the two tents. Bedouins do not bury power cables between their tents. Engineers do. The room wakes up quietly. Another photograph is pulled from the stack. Same area. 2 days earlier. Empty. No tents. No tracks. Nothing. They measure shadows. Time of day. Sun angle. The dimensions match too well to be coincidence. Whatever sits beneath those canvases is tall, metallic, and very familiar. It is a P-12 radar unit. The realization doesn't come with celebration. It comes with unease. The radar is isolated, 10 kilometers from the nearest Egyptian base, guarded lightly, hidden but not defended like something expected to be attacked. Whoever placed it there trusted distance and invisibility more than firepower. The report moves fast. Faster than aircraft ever could. From analyst to officer. From officer to command. Within hours, it lands on the desk of the Israeli Air Force leadership. The first reaction is automatic, almost comforting in its simplicity. Destroy it. 4 jets, cluster munitions, napalm if needed. Turn the site into a scar on the map before dawn. It is the correct answer. The safe answer. The answer everyone has rehearsed for years. Then someone asks the wrong question. If we destroy it, what do we learn? The room goes quiet. The thought is uncomfortable because it is true. A destroyed radar tells you nothing except that it can be replaced. Another will arrive, another crew, another set of pilots flying blind. The problem is not the machine. It is ignorance. To understand a system like the P-12, you don't need courage. You need access. You need to see how it thinks, how it filters what it ignores. You need to take it apart in good light, not watch it burn in bad weather. The target has been found. That part is done. Now comes the dangerous part. Deciding what to do with it. The discovery of the radar creates a brief, dangerous illusion that the problem is already solved. In military planning rooms, that illusion is seductive. You find the target you destroy, the target you move on. It is clean. It is familiar. And most importantly, it feels safe. The first orders reflect that instinct. 4 aircraft, cluster munitions, a dawn strike. Erase the site before the Egyptians even know what happened. It is the kind of plan that fits neatly on a map and ends with a line drawn through the problem in red ink. But red ink does not fix blindness. Someone in the room history is unclear who breaks the rhythm. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a question delivered with the uncomfortable calm of someone who has done the math twice. If we destroy it, what changes? The room pauses. Not because the answer is difficult, but because it is obvious. The Soviet Union will ship another unit. The Egyptians will deploy it somewhere else. The sky will remain hostile. Israeli pilots will still not know what the radar sees, what it ignores, or how it lies. Destroying the radar solves today. Understanding it solves the war. That is when the idea surfaces. Quiet at first, almost embarrassed by its own audacity. What if we take it? There is a moment of silence that feels longer than it is. Someone exhales. Someone else smiles. Not because it is funny, but because it is absurd. Radars are not souvenirs. They weigh several tons. They are deployed in enemy territory. They are protected by physics distance and gravity. And gravity, unlike politics, does not negotiate. The engineers are called in. Calculations begin. Numbers pile up on paper like accusations. The radar is divided into major components. The antenna assembly, the control unit, together roughly 7 tons. The newly acquired CH-53 helicopters can lift heavy loads, but not this heavy. Not safely. Not according to the manual. The manual, it is noted dryly, was written in a factory, not in a war. Temperature becomes an enemy. Hot air is thinner. Thinner air means less lift. Wind becomes a variable that cannot be controlled. Enemy fire becomes a risk multiplier. One lucky bullet into a transmission housing one mechanical failure at the wrong moment, and the helicopter becomes a falling object with passengers. This is not a raid. This is an equation balanced on the edge of tolerance, and yet the potential reward is disproportionate to the risk. With an intact P-12, Israeli engineers could dissect the system, identify its frequencies, understand its filtering logic, learn how it tracks, how it loses track, and how it can be deceived. More importantly, this knowledge could be shared. Washington would be very interested. The discussion sharpens. This is not about bravery. No one talks about heroism. They talk about probabilities, about margins, about whether calculated risk is still calculation when the numbers are this thin. Someone finally says it out loud. If we bomb it, we stay blind. If we steal it, we might see again. The room does not cheer. There is no dramatic vote. There is only a slow convergence toward an uncomfortable truth. The safe option is no longer acceptable. The dangerous option is no longer madness. Orders change. The airstrike is canceled. The paratroopers are called. The helicopter crews are briefed carefully without adjectives. They are told what the load weighs. They are told what the manuals say. They are also told that manuals do not win wars. Time becomes the enemy now. 48 hours to plan something that was never meant to be planned. Soldiers who trained to destroy must learn to dismantle, to cut bolts instead of throats, to carry tools instead of extra ammunition. Somewhere across the water, the radar crew goes about its routine, confident in camouflage and distance. They believe they are invisible. After all, invisibility has worked very well for them so far. They do not realize that the most dangerous thing in war is not being seen. It is being understood. The operation does not begin where the radar is. It begins far away in the sky, with noise made on purpose. Israeli A-4, Skyhawks cross the canal low and fast engines loud enough to wake every radar operator within range. Flares bloom in the distance. Secondary targets are struck. Explosions echo across the desert. To Egyptian command, this looks familiar. Another night. Another raid. Attention shifts upward exactly where it is meant to go. While eyes follow the noise, something quieter moves below it. 3 helicopters skim the surface of the Red Sea, flying low enough that the rotors taste salt. Inside them are 66 paratroopers, loaded not just with rifles, but with oxygen tanks, acetylene cylinders, hoses, oversized wrenches, cutting tools, and more patience than ammunition. They are not here to destroy anything. They are here to take something apart. The helicopters set them down several kilometers from the target. No lights, no talking, just boots on sand and the slow, exhausting march through dunes that all look the same. The men move in short bursts, then stop. Listen. Move again. Time is already slipping, and nobody has touched the radar yet. At the perimeter, the intelligence proves accurate. The site is quiet. Too quiet. A handful of Egyptian soldiers lounge near shallow trenches, smoking, watching the distant flashes in the sky. They believe the danger is elsewhere. The desert encourages that belief. The assault is short and violent, but not dramatic. Suppressed shots, shouted orders, a brief exchange of fire. Within minutes, it is over. 2 guards lie dead. Several are captured. The rest vanish into the dark, running toward anything that feels safer than here. The position is secured. The clock starts screaming. The radar looms larger up close. In daylight, it would look impressive. At night, it looks stubborn. Metal on metal. Soviet engineering that was never meant to be disassembled by strangers in a hurry. The order is simple and merciless. Cut it free. The first torches ignite. Blue flames hiss against steel. Bolts that have not moved since the factory resist with predictable enthusiasm. Some turn. Many do not. Paint burns. Grease smokes. The smell of hot metal spreads across the site, sharp and unmistakable. Minutes stretch. Wrenches bend. Soldiers hang their weight off handles, 4 men turning one bolt together until it finally gives with a crack that sounds far too loud in the open desert. Hydraulic lines are cut. Electrical cables are severed and labeled in the dark by touch alone. This is not demolition. It is surgery under fire. The antenna assembly is treated like glass. Dipoles are folded detached and tied down with care that borders on tenderness. If the antenna breaks, the mission fails. Nobody says it out loud, but everyone knows it. Then something goes wrong. One of the acetylene torches sputters and dies. The tank is empty. There are still bolts to cut. Heavy ones, the kind that do not respect improvisation. For a moment, the desert holds its breath. Then the men adapt. Manual cutters, saws, leverage. Brutal, slow force. Sweat runs into eyes. Gloves burn, muscles shake. Time keeps moving. Somewhere in the distance, the airstrike noise fades. The distraction is ending. Dawn is no longer theoretical. At last, the containers separate from the truck chassis. 2 massive pieces rest on the sand, wrapped in cargo nets and steel cables. The radar is no longer a structure. It is cargo. The radio crackles. The call goes out. The helicopters are inbound. When they arrive, the desert erupts. Rotor wash turns sand into a blinding storm. Men fight to stay upright, crawling to secure hooks beneath the hovering aircraft. Static electricity snaps. Sparks jump. Fingers refuse to let go. The first load lifts. 4 tons rise unwillingly from the ground. Warning lights flicker in the cockpit above, unseen by the men below. The second helicopter takes the antenna lighter, but more awkward, swinging like a pendulum. There is no celebration. No relief. Not yet. As the helicopters pull away, the paratroopers withdraw on foot, leaving behind an empty site that looks less like it was attacked and more like it was dismantled by ghosts. By the time the first light touches the dunes, the radar is gone. No plan B was ever written, because there was never time for one. The radar leaves the ground reluctantly, as if it knows it does not belong in the air. Steel cables tighten. The load sways once, twice, then rises. 4 tons of Soviet certainty now hang beneath an Israeli helicopter, suspended by engineering tolerances and stubborn will. Below, the desert shrinks. Above, the cockpit fills with light. Warning lights appear almost immediately. Transmission temperature. Torque limits. Systems that were never designed for this particular interpretation of reality begin to complain. The helicopter vibrates not violently, but enough to be noticed. Enough to remind the crew that physics has joined the mission uninvited. The pilot keeps his voice flat. Numbers are read aloud. Airspeed. Altitude. Engine output pushed beyond what the manual politely recommends. Manuals, after all, assume reasonable people. The formation turns east toward the dark line of the sea. Over water, there are fewer places to pretend everything is fine. If something fails, there is nowhere to put it down gently. The radar swings slightly, a heavy pendulum that does not forgive mistakes. Halfway across, the situation deteriorates. Hydraulic pressure drops. Not catastrophically, just enough to matter. Controls feel slower, heavier. A message appears that does not shout, but does not need to. This is no longer theoretical. The helicopter is bleeding capability one system at a time. The obvious solution presents itself. Drop the load. It would save the aircraft. It would save the crew. It would turn a dangerous mission into a survivable failure. Somewhere in the dark below, 4 tons of radar would vanish into the sea, and the story would end, quietly filed under almost. The pilot considers it. Then he looks at the remaining distance. The coastline is visible now, a thin, pale line ahead. Not far. Too far. The helicopter is descending. Altitude bleeds away second by second. Dropping the load would be correct. Keeping it is a decision. He lowers the nose, slightly trading altitude for speed. It is an old idea, inelegant and risky. The radar swings alarmingly close to the water, close enough that everyone notices and no one comments. Airspeed increases. Lift follows reluctantly. The helicopter stops sinking. Barely. Every vibration is felt now. Every sound seems louder. The crew does not speak unless necessary. The warning lights remain lit quietly, judging everyone involved. The coast rushes closer. Sand replaces black water. There is no triumph in the cockpit, only focus. The landing zone is not the base. It will not make it that far. A stretch of flat ground near the shoreline will have to do. The helicopter comes down hard. Not a crash. Not a landing anyone will brag about. The load is released, immediately dropped onto the sand, like something hot that nobody wants to hold anymore. The radar hits the ground with a dull, expensive sound. The second helicopter arrives moments later, its load lighter, but its nerves no calmer. When the rotors finally slow and stop, the silence feels unreal. Men step out and look at what they have brought home. The radar is dented, scratched, leaking fluid. It smells of burned oil and sea air. Cyrillic letters stare back at them, unimpressed. Nobody cheers. The mission is not over. But the impossible part is, by the time the sun begins to rise, the radar rests on Israeli soil. Not destroyed, not buried, intact enough to matter. Physics tried to say no. It was not ignored. It was negotiated with. By the time morning settles over the desert, the consequences are already spreading. In Cairo, the report lands like a fracture. The radar is not damaged. It is not destroyed. It is missing. Phones ring, voices rise, and explanations collapse under their own weight. A military installation does not simply disappear. Not without explosions, not without witnesses. Yet this one did. In Moscow, there is no shouting, only calculation. The P-12 is not an Egyptian asset, it is Soviet doctrine-made metal. It watches skies far beyond the Middle East. If one unit has been captured intact, then every system built on the same logic is suddenly suspect. The question is no longer what Israel took, but who will study it next. The answer arrives quietly. Engineers approach the radar with care, expecting traps. There are none. The system is confident in its own invulnerability. It is powered on. Frequencies are mapped, emissions traced. Aircraft are flown against it again and again until patterns emerge. What it sees clearly, what it struggles to filter, where it hesitates. From that knowledge comes something more damaging than bombs. Deception, jamming, false targets, screens filled with ghosts. Weeks later, Israeli aircraft return to the sky. Same routes, same altitudes, but the radar no longer tells the truth. Missiles chase phantoms. Guns fire at noise. The advantage quietly shifts back. The Soviet response is expensive and unavoidable. Systems are revised. Networks updated. Assumptions rewritten. All because one machine was taken instead of destroyed. The lesson is simple and uncomfortable. Modern war is not won by who hits hardest, but by who understands better. Technology creates power, but it also creates habits. And habits create blind spots. That night did not destroy a radar. It destroyed an illusion,